Sarah Martinez had always been smaller than everyone else around her. At 5 feet 2 inches tall and weighing barely 110 pounds, she looked more like someone who belonged in a library than on a military training ground. But appearances can be deceiving, and Sarah had learned that lesson the hard way throughout her 26 years of life. The morning sun beat down mercilessly on the Naval Special Warfare Training Facility in Coronado, California. Sarah adjusted her tactical gear for the 100th time, trying to make the oversized equipment fit her petite frame properly. Around her, dozens of other trainees were doing the same. But unlike Sarah, most of them looked like they had been carved from granite. Broad shoulders, thick necks, and arms that could probably bench press a small car. Sarah knew she stood out like a sore thumb. This was the advanced tactical training course that would determine who moved forward in the special operations pipeline and who went home. Sarah had fought tooth and nail to even get this far. She had graduated top of her class from the Naval Academy, excelled in every physical fitness test, and proven herself capable time and time again. Yet here she was, still having to prove that she belonged. The lead instructor, Master Chief Peterson, was a mountain of a man who had served with SEAL Team 6 for over 15 years. His weathered face showed the kind of experience that came from real combat, not just training exercises. When he looked at Sarah, she could see the doubt in his eyes. It was the same look she had gotten from countless instructors, fellow service members, and even some of her own family. "Listen up, people," Master Chief Peterson's voice boomed across the training yard. "Today we begin the most challenging phase of your training. Over the next 6 weeks, you will be pushed beyond what you think are your limits. Some of you will quit, some of you will fail, and some of you will discover that you have what it takes to operate in the most dangerous situations our country faces." Sarah felt her heart rate increase, but not from fear. She felt excited. This was what she had been working toward her entire adult life. Ever since she was a little girl watching her grandfather tell stories about his service in World War II, she had known she wanted to serve her country in the most meaningful way possible. For Sarah, that meant special operations. The first week of training was designed to weed out anyone who wasn't completely committed. The day started at 4 in the morning with a 5-mile run in full gear. Sarah had learned to start near the back of the pack, not because she was slow, but because it gave her a better view of everyone around her. She had discovered early in her military career that observation was one of her greatest strengths. While the bigger trainees relied on their natural physical advantages, Sarah had to be smarter. She studied the courses before running them, memorized the locations of every obstacle, and planned her approach carefully. When others were using brute strength to overcome challenges, Sarah was finding more efficient ways to accomplish the same goals. The other trainees had started to notice her too, but not always in a positive way. There was a group of 5 men who had formed an unofficial alliance during the first week. They were led by a guy named Marcus Thompson, a former college football player who stood 6 feet 4 inches tall and weighed 240 pounds. Marcus had made it clear from day one that he didn't think women belonged in special operations training. "Hey, Tiny," Marcus called out to Sarah as she was cleaning her weapon after a particularly grueling day on the shooting range. "You sure you're in the right place? I think the regular Navy might be more your speed." Sarah looked up from her rifle and met Marcus's gaze steadily. She had dealt with bullies her whole life, and she had learned that the best response was usually calm confidence rather than anger. "I'm exactly where I belong," she replied simply, then went back to her weapon maintenance. Marcus laughed and nudged one of his buddies. "Did you hear that, guys? She thinks she belongs here. That's cute." The other men in Marcus's group chuckled, but Sarah noticed that several other trainees were watching the interaction with interest. Some looked uncomfortable with Marcus's behavior, while others seemed to be waiting to see how Sarah would respond. Sarah had learned long ago that her size could actually be an advantage if she used it correctly. People underestimated her, which meant they often let their guard down around her. She had also learned that the best way to earn respect was through performance, not words. The next day brought urban warfare training, which involved moving through a mock city environment while engaging targets and avoiding simulated enemy fire. This was the kind of training where Sarah's natural abilities really shone. Her small size allowed her to move through tight spaces that larger trainees couldn't navigate as easily. Her attention to detail helped her spot threats that others missed, and her careful planning meant she rarely found herself in unnecessarily dangerous positions. Sarah finished the course in the top 5, ahead of Marcus and most of his group. She could see the frustration building in their faces, and she knew it was only a matter of time before they tried to do something about it. That evening, as Sarah was studying tactical manuals in the barracks, she overheard Marcus and his friends talking in the next room. They weren't trying to be quiet, and she got the impression they wanted her to hear what they were saying. "She's making us all look bad," one of them said. "A girl that size has no business being here." "Don't worry about it," Marcus replied. "I've got a plan to show everyone what she's really made of. Tomorrow's hand-to-hand combat training. Let's see how tough she is when she's actually fighting someone instead of just running around playing hide and seek." Sarah felt a chill run down her spine, but it wasn't fear. She had been preparing for this moment her entire military career. She knew that eventually someone would try to use her size against her, and she had spent years learning how to turn that disadvantage into a strength. The next morning arrived gray and overcast with a cool breeze coming off the Pacific Ocean. The hand-to-hand combat training was scheduled to take place in a large gymnasium filled with wrestling mats and various training equipment. Master Chief Peterson explained that they would be working on close-quarters combat techniques that might be needed in real-world operations. In special operations, you never know when you might find yourself in a situation where your weapon is compromised and you have to rely on your hands, he explained. The techniques we'll be practicing today could save your life someday. The training started with basic defensive moves and gradually worked up to more advanced techniques. Sarah had been studying martial arts since she was 12 years old, but she kept that information to herself. Her grandfather had taught her that sometimes the best advantage was the one your opponent didn't know you had. As the morning progressed, the training became more intense. Trainees were paired up to practice different scenarios, and Sarah could see Marcus and his group positioning themselves to be partnered with her. Master Chief Peterson seemed oblivious to what was happening, or perhaps he was deliberately allowing it to play out. "Martinez," Peterson called out, "you're up with Thompson for the next drill." Sarah walked to the center of the mat where Marcus was waiting. He was grinning in a way that made it clear he thought this was going to be easy. Around them, the other trainees formed a circle to watch. Sarah could feel the tension in the room. Everyone knew this was about more than just training. "The scenario is simple," Peterson explained. "Thompson, you're an enemy combatant who has grabbed Martinez from behind. Martinez, your weapon has been knocked away, and you need to break free and neutralize the threat." Marcus positioned himself behind Sarah and wrapped his massive arms around her in a bear hug. His grip was intentionally tight, tighter than necessary for the training exercise. Sarah could feel him trying to squeeze the air out of her lungs. "Give up yet, Tiny?" Marcus whispered in her ear, quiet enough that Peterson couldn't hear. Sarah took a deep breath and centered herself. This was exactly the kind of situation she had been preparing for. Marcus was bigger and stronger, but he was also overconfident and careless. Those were weaknesses she could exploit. Instead of trying to break free using brute strength, which would have been impossible, Sarah used Marcus's own momentum against him. She suddenly dropped her weight and pivoted her hips, causing Marcus to lose his balance slightly. In that split second of instability, she drove her elbow back into his solar plexus with surgical precision. Marcus's grip loosened just enough for Sarah to slip out of his hold. Before he could recover, she had spun around and swept his legs, sending all 240 pounds of him crashing to the mat. The entire sequence took less than 3 seconds. The gymnasium fell silent. Marcus lay on the mat, gasping for breath and staring up at the ceiling in shock. Sarah stood over him, not even breathing hard. "Excellent technique, Martinez," Master Chief Peterson said, breaking the silence. "That's exactly how you handle a larger opponent." use their size against them. As Marcus struggled to get back to his feet, Sarah could see the humiliation and anger in his face. She knew this wasn't over. If anything, she had just made things worse for herself. But she also knew she had made an important point. Size and strength weren't everything. The rest of the day passed without incident, but Sarah could feel the tension building. Marcus and his group were clearly planning something, and she could see in their faces every time they looked at her. They weren't just embarrassed anymore. They were angry. That evening, Sarah made sure to vary her routine. Instead of going to the mess hall at her usual time, she went early and sat where she could see all the entrances. Instead of taking her normal route back to the barracks, she took a longer path that kept her in well-lit areas. She had learned in her grandfather's stories that the best way to survive dangerous situations was to see them coming. But, even with her precautions, she couldn't avoid what happened next. The following day brought a new challenge that would test everything she had learned about survival, tactics, and the true meaning of strength. The morning briefing revealed that the day's training would involve a complex scenario designed to simulate a real-world mission. The trainees would be divided into small teams and given objectives to accomplish within a mock enemy compound. The exercise would test their ability to work together, think under pressure, and adapt to changing situations. Sarah was assigned to a team with 3 other trainees, none of whom were part of Marcus's group. She felt relieved at first, thinking this might give her a break from the ongoing tension. But as the teams were finalized and the briefing continued, she noticed Marcus and his friends exchanging meaningful glances. The mock compound was located in a remote section of the training facility, surrounded by dense woods and connected to the main base by a single dirt road. It was designed to replicate the kind of environment where special operations forces might actually find themselves operating. Sarah's team was given an objective that required them to infiltrate the compound, gather intelligence from a specific building, and extract without being detected by the opposing force, which was made up of instructors playing the role of enemy combatants. As her team prepared for the mission, Sarah studied the compound layout and began developing a plan. Her teammates seemed capable and focused, and she felt confident that they could accomplish their objective if they worked together effectively. What Sarah didn't know was that Marcus had convinced one of the instructors that she wasn't ready for this level of training and needed to be tested more thoroughly. The instructor, who had his own doubts about whether women belonged in special operations, agreed to modify the exercise to put additional pressure on Sarah's team. The mission began just after sunset, with Sarah's team approaching the compound through the woods. They moved slowly and carefully, using hand signals to communicate and staying in the shadows to avoid detection. Sarah felt energized by the challenge. This was the kind of complex, high-stakes scenario she had been dreaming of since she first decided to pursue special operations training. But as they got closer to their objective, Sarah began to notice things that didn't seem right. There were too many guards for a training exercise, and they seemed to be positioned specifically to make her team's mission nearly impossible. Even more concerning, she caught glimpses of Marcus and his friends among the opposing force, which shouldn't have been possible since they were supposed to be running their own separate mission. Sarah tried to warn her teammates, but before she could explain what she had observed, their position was suddenly illuminated by powerful floodlights. Blank ammunition began firing from multiple directions, and loudspeakers announced that Sarah's team had been captured. According to the exercise rules, captured trainees were supposed to be taken to a designated holding area where they would wait for the scenario to end. But instead of being escorted to the official detention facility, Sarah and her teammates were separated and taken to different locations. Sarah found herself in a small storage building at the far edge of the compound, guarded by Marcus and 2 of his friends. The building was isolated and poorly lit, far from where any instructors would be monitoring the exercise. Well, Marcus said as Sarah was pushed into the building. Looks like your luck finally ran out tiny. Sarah assessed her situation quickly. She was outnumbered 3-1 in an isolated location with no immediate way to call for help. The guards were all larger and stronger than her, and they clearly had something planned that went far beyond the normal parameters of a training exercise. But Sarah had been preparing for exactly this kind of situation her entire adult life. She had studied every manual, learned every technique, and practiced every scenario she could imagine. More importantly, she had learned from her grandfather that real strength came not from size or anger, but from staying calm and thinking clearly under pressure. As Marcus and his friends closed in around her, Sarah began to put her training to use in ways they never could have anticipated. She was about to show them that cornering a warrior, even a small one, was a very dangerous mistake. Sarah kept her breathing steady as Marcus and his two companions formed a triangle around her in the dimly lit storage building. The single overhead light cast harsh shadows across their faces, making them look more menacing than they probably intended. She could smell the musty odor of old equipment and dust mixed with the nervous sweat of men who thought they held all the power. "You know what your problem is, Martinez?" Marcus said, stepping closer. "You think you're as good as us. You think that little stunt you pulled yesterday makes you tough." Sarah remained silent, using the time to catalog everything in the room that could be useful. A stack of wooden crates along one wall, metal folding chairs scattered around, a maintenance toolbox on a workbench. Most importantly, she noted that there was only one exit, but the walls were thin, prefab construction that wouldn't stop her if she needed an alternative escape route. "We're going to teach you a lesson about respect," continued Marcus. "About knowing your place." One of his friends, a stocky guy named Rodriguez, nodded eagerly. "Maybe after tonight, you'll realize this isn't the place for little girls playing soldier." The third man, Johnson, seemed slightly less enthusiastic but was clearly going along with whatever Marcus had planned. Sarah made a mental note that Johnson might be the weak link if she needed to exploit divisions within a group. Sarah had learned long ago that bullies operated on predictable patterns. They used intimidation first, hoping their victims would submit without a fight. When intimidation failed, they escalated to physical confrontation, usually expecting their size advantage to make the outcome inevitable. What they never expected was someone who understood their psychology better than they understood themselves. "I'm going to give you one chance to walk away from this," Sarah said quietly. Her voice was calm and steady, which seemed to unnerve Marcus more than if she had shown fear. Marcus laughed, but it sounded forced. "You're giving us a chance? That's rich. You're outnumbered 3-1, and we're all twice your size." "Size isn't everything," Sarah replied. "You should have learned that yesterday." The comment hit its mark. Marcus's face darkened with anger, and Sarah could see his hands clench into fists. She had successfully provoked him into making this personal rather than tactical, which was exactly what she wanted. Angry opponents made mistakes. "Yesterday was just training," Marcus snarled. "This is different." Sarah shifted her weight slightly, moving into a more balanced stance that would allow her to react quickly in any direction. The movement was subtle, but she could see that Johnson noticed it. He took a half step back, which told her he was already having second thoughts about their plan. "What exactly are you planning to do?" Sarah asked. She needed to understand their intentions to choose the appropriate level of response. If they were just planning to humiliate her, she would handle the situation differently than if they intended actual violence. "We're going to show everyone what happens when girls try to play in the big leagues," Rodriguez answered, cracking his knuckles. "Nothing too permanent, but enough to convince you to drop out of training." Sarah felt a cold anger settle in her stomach, but she kept it controlled. These men were planning to assault her because they couldn't accept that someone smaller than them might be more capable. They were willing to risk their own military careers and potentially commit serious crimes just to protect their fragile egos. "Last chance," Sarah said. "Walk away now, and we can all pretend this never happened." Marcus stepped forward, raising his fist. "I'm done listening to you talk." What happened next took less than 10 seconds, but Sarah's training allowed her to process information and, react with a speed that seemed impossible to the three men who thought they had her cornered. As Marcus swung his fist toward her face, Sarah didn't try to block it or dodge backward, which is what most people would instinctively do. Instead, she stepped forward and to the side, using Marcus's own momentum to throw him off balance. She grabbed his extended arm and used a joint lock technique she had learned in her martial arts training, applying pressure to his elbow in a way that sent him crashing into the stack of wooden crates. Rodriguez tried to grab her from behind, but Sarah had already anticipated his movement. She ducked under his reaching arms and swept his legs, sending him tumbling to the floor. Before he could get back up, she grabbed one of the metal folding chairs and positioned it between herself and the remaining threats. Johnson hesitated, clearly unsure whether to continue the assault or try to help his fallen friends. That moment of hesitation was all Sarah needed to take complete control of the situation. "Johnson," she said sharply, getting his attention. "You can either help them up and get them out of here, or you can join them on the ground. Your choice." Johnson looked at Marcus, who was groaning, and tried to untangle himself from the broken crates, then at Rodriguez, who was holding his head and looking dazed from his fall. The confidence had completely drained from Johnson's face. "This is crazy," Johnson muttered. "This wasn't supposed to happen like this." "No, it wasn't," Sarah agreed. "But here we are. What are you going to do about it?" Before Johnson could answer, the door to the storage building burst open. Master Chief Peterson stood in the doorway, taking in the scene with sharp, experienced eyes. Behind him were two other instructors and several trainees who had apparently been searching for Sarah's missing team. "What the hell is going on here?" Peterson demanded. Marcus struggled to his feet, his face red with embarrassment and pain. "It was just training, Master Chief. We were running a prisoner interrogation scenario." Peterson's expression didn't change, but Sarah could see the skepticism in his eyes. "Is that so? And who authorized this training scenario?" Marcus opened his mouth to answer, but Peterson cut him off. "Before you answer that, Thompson, you should know that Instructor Williams has been looking for you and your team for the past hour. You were supposed to be running a completely different mission on the other side of the compound." The silence that followed was deafening. Marcus, Rodriguez, and Johnson all looked like they wanted to disappear into the floor. Sarah remained standing near the chair she had grabbed, ready to defend herself if the situation escalated again. "Martinez," Peterson said, "are you injured?" "No, Master Chief," Sarah replied. "I'm Phoenix." Peterson nodded, then looked at the three men. "The three of you will report to my office immediately after this exercise concludes. And I mean immediately." As Peterson and the other instructors escorted Marcus and his friends out of the building, Sarah finally allowed herself to relax slightly. But she knew this incident would have consequences that extended far beyond whatever punishment the three men would receive. The rest of the training exercise was canceled, and all the trainees were recalled to the main facility. As Sarah walked back through the woods, she was joined by several of her fellow trainees who wanted to know what had happened. Word had already spread that there had been some kind of incident involving her and Marcus's group. "Are you okay?" asked Lisa Chun, one of the few other women in the training program. "We heard there was some kind of fight." Sarah nodded. "I'm Phoenix. Just some guys who thought they could push me around." "I heard you took on 3 of them by yourself," said another trainee, a guy named Williams who had always been friendly to Sarah. "Is that true?" Sarah didn't want to make the situation worse by bragging or providing details that might be used against her later. "I defended myself. That's all." But news of what happened spread through the training facility like wildfire. By the time Sarah returned to the barracks, every trainee knew that she had faced down Marcus and his friends and come out on top. The reactions were mixed. Some trainees looked at her with new respect, while others seemed to view her as a troublemaker who was causing problems for everyone. That evening, Sarah was called to Master Chief Peterson's office. She expected to be questioned about the incident, but what she found was more complicated than she had anticipated. Peterson wasn't alone. With him were the facility commander, Captain Reynolds, and a woman in civilian clothes who introduced herself as Dr. Sarah Mitchell from Naval Special Warfare Command. "Sit down, Martinez," Captain Reynolds said. "We need to talk." Sarah took a seat in front of the desk, maintaining her military posture despite feeling nervous about what was coming next. "We've spoken to Thompson, Rodriguez, and Johnson," Dr. Mitchell began. "They've given us their version of what happened tonight. Now we'd like to hear yours." Sarah recounted the events honestly and completely, from the moment she was separated from her team to the point when Master Chief Peterson arrived. She didn't embellish or try to make herself look heroic. She simply told the truth. When she finished, Captain Reynolds leaned back in his chair. "That's quite a story, Martinez. According to the three men involved, you attacked them without provocation during what they claim was a legitimate training exercise." Sarah felt her heart sink. She had expected Marcus and his friends to lie, but she had hoped the physical evidence and the circumstances would make the truth obvious. However, Dr. Mitchell continued, their story has some significant problems. For one thing, they couldn't explain why they were in that building instead of at their assigned mission location. For another, the injuries they sustained are consistent with defensive actions, not an unprovoked attack. More importantly, added Master Chief Peterson, we found evidence that they had been planning this incident for several days. Johnson broke down during questioning and admitted that the whole thing was Marcus's idea to force you out of the program. Sarah felt relief wash over her, but she tried not to show it. She knew that even being vindicated in this incident might not be enough to save her military career. "The three men involved will be removed from the program immediately," Captain Reynolds announced. "They'll face disciplinary action that could include court-martial, depending on the final investigation results." Dr. Mitchell leaned forward. "But that's not why you're here, Martinez. We need to discuss your future in this program." Sarah's stomach tightened. This was the moment she had been dreading. "What happened tonight demonstrates both your strengths and the challenges you face," Dr. Mitchell continued. "Your ability to defend yourself against multiple larger opponents is impressive. Your tactical thinking and situational awareness are exactly what we look for in special operations personnel." Sarah waited for the "but" that she knew was coming. "But," said Captain Reynolds, "this incident also highlights the fact that some people will never accept your presence in this field. Tonight won't be the last time someone tries to force you out through intimidation or worse." "With respect, sir," Sarah replied. "That's not my problem. That's their problem." Dr. Mitchell smiled slightly. "That's exactly the attitude we hoped you'd have. The question is whether you're prepared for the reality of what lies ahead." "What do you mean?" Sarah asked. "Special operations is still very much a man's world," Dr. Mitchell explained. "If you complete this training and move into an operational unit, you'll likely face similar challenges. You'll have to prove yourself over and over again. Some people will never accept you regardless of your performance." Sarah had already thought about these challenges extensively. She knew that being one of the first women to attempt this path would mean facing obstacles that her male counterparts would never encounter. But she also knew that someone had to be first if anything was ever going to change. "I understand the challenges, ma'am," Sarah said. "But I didn't come this far to give up because it's difficult." Master Chief Peterson spoke up for the first time since the meeting began. "Martinez, in 30 years of military service, I've seen a lot of tough people. Men and women who could handle anything thrown at them. What I saw you do tonight, both physically and mentally, puts you in pretty exclusive company." Sarah felt a surge of pride, but she kept her expression neutral. Captain Reynolds stood up, signaling that the meeting was coming to an end. "You'll continue with the training program, Martinez. But understand that the scrutiny on you will be intense. Every mistake will be magnified. Every success will be questioned. Are you prepared for that?" "Yes, sir," Sarah replied without hesitation. As Sarah left the office and walked back to the barracks, she reflected on everything that had happened. The incident in the storage building had been traumatic and dangerous, but it had also been a turning point. She had proven to herself and others that she could handle extreme situations and come out on top. More importantly, she had learned something about the true nature of strength. It wasn't about size or aggression. It was about preparation, intelligence, and the courage to do what was right even when the odds were against you. The next few days would bring new challenges and new opportunities to prove herself. But Sarah felt more confident than ever that she belonged exactly where she was. She had faced down her doubters and emerged stronger than before. Now it was time to show everyone what she was really capable of achieving. 6 months later, Sarah stood on the deck of a naval vessel cutting through the dark waters of the Mediterranean Sea. The salty spray hit her face as she checked her equipment one final time before what would be her first real combat mission as a newly qualified naval special warfare operator. The events at the training facility felt like a lifetime ago, though the lessons she had learned there continued to shape every decision she made. The months following the incident with Marcus and his friends had been the most challenging of Sarah's military career. True to Dr. Mitchell's warning, the scrutiny had been intense. Every training exercise became a test, not just of her abilities, but of her right to be there at all. Some instructors seemed to go out of their way to create impossible scenarios designed to make her fail. Others appear to be waiting for any excuse to question whether women belonged in special operations. But Sarah had persevered through a combination of exceptional performance and unwavering determination. She finished the training program ranked third out of 47 graduates, earning the respect of even her harshest critics. More importantly, she had proven to herself that she could handle anything thrown at her. Now, as she prepared for her first operational deployment with SEAL Team 7, Sarah reflected on how much had changed since that night in the storage building. The 3 men who had confronted her had all been discharged from the military with less than honorable conditions. Marcus Thompson had even faced criminal charges, though they were eventually dropped as part of a plea agreement that required him to attend anger management counseling. The story of what happened had spread throughout the special operations community, taking on an almost mythical quality as it was retold. Some versions portrayed Sarah as an unstoppable warrior who had single-handedly defeated 3 trained fighters. Others painted her as a troublemaker who had caused unnecessary drama. The truth, as usual, was somewhere in between. What mattered most was that Sarah had earned her place through merit, not sympathy or political correctness. Her teammates knew they could count on her in a firefight, and that was the only opinion that really mattered. "Martinez, you ready for this?" asked Lieutenant Commander James Walsh, the team leader for tonight's mission. Walsh was a 15-year veteran who had initially been skeptical about having a woman on his team, but had quickly become one of Sarah's strongest supporters after seeing her performance in training. "Ready as I'll ever be, sir," Sarah replied, checking the action on her rifle one more time. The mission was a hostage rescue operation in a coastal town that had been taken over by a terrorist organization. Intelligence indicated that 12 American contractors were being held in a compound near the harbor. Sarah's team had been tasked with infiltrating the compound, neutralizing the guards, and extracting the hostages before enemy reinforcements could arrive. It was exactly the kind of high-stakes, complex operation that Sarah had been dreaming of since she first decided to pursue special operations training. But as the rubber boat carrying her team approached the darkened shoreline, she couldn't help but think about how different her life might have been if she had given in to the pressure and quit after the incident with Marcus. The team moved silently through the shallow water and onto the rocky beach. Sarah took point, using night vision goggles to scan for threats as they advanced toward the target building. Her small size, which had once been seen as a disadvantage, now allowed her to move through the terrain with exceptional stealth. As they approached the compound, Sarah spotted 2 guards patrolling the perimeter. She signaled back to her teammates, indicating the guards' positions and movement patterns. The team had rehearsed this scenario dozens of times, and everyone knew their role. Sarah was responsible for neutralizing the guard closest to their entry point, while another team member handled the second guard. The timing had to be perfect to avoid raising an alarm that would endanger the hostages. Sarah moved through the shadows like a ghost, using every piece of cover available to remain undetected. When she was within striking distance of her target, she waited for the signal from her team leader. The guard was larger than her, probably outweighing her by 70 pounds, but Sarah had learned long ago that size wasn't the most important factor in close-quarters combat. The signal came as a barely audible click in her earpiece. Sarah moved with lightning speed, covering the distance to the guard in 3 quick steps. Before he could react or call out, she had applied a sleeper hold that cut off blood flow to his brain. Within seconds, the guard slumped unconscious to the ground. Across the courtyard, her teammate had successfully neutralized the other guard using similar techniques. The perimeter was now secure, and the team could proceed to the main building where the hostages were being held. As they approached the building, Sarah spotted something that made her freeze in place. Through a window on the second floor, she could see a guard who hadn't been identified in the intelligence briefings. He was positioned where he could see the entire courtyard, and he appeared to be alert and actively scanning for threats. Sarah quickly signaled to her team leader, indicating the additional threat. Walsh studied the situation for a moment, then made a decision that would test everything Sarah had learned about leadership and teamwork. "Martinez, can you get to that window without being seen?" Walsh whispered into his radio. Sarah studied the building layout and identified a possible route. There was a drainage pipe running up the side of the building that would provide handholds, and the guard's position suggested he was focused on the ground level rather than potential threats from above. "Affirmative," Sarah replied. "Give me 3 minutes." Sarah slung her rifle across her back and began climbing the drainage pipe with careful, deliberate movements. Her years of rock climbing as a hobby had prepared her for this kind of challenge, and her light weight meant she could move up the pipe without creating noise that might alert the guard. When she reached the second floor level, Sarah could see the guard clearly through the window. He was young, probably no more than 20, and he looked nervous. Sarah realized that this might be his first real combat situation, which could make him either more dangerous or less effective, depending on how he reacted to stress. Sarah positioned herself just below the window and prepared to enter the room. She had several options for neutralizing the guard, ranging from lethal to non-lethal, depending on the circumstances. The choice she made would depend on his reaction when she appeared. Sarah took a deep breath and quickly pulled herself up and through the window in one fluid motion. The guard spun around in surprise, reaching for his weapon, but Sarah was already moving. She struck him with a precise blow to a pressure point on his neck, rendering him unconscious without causing permanent injury. As the guard slumped to the floor, Sarah quickly secured his weapon and signaled to her team that the threat had been neutralized. The way was now clear for the main assault on the building. The rest of the mission proceeded with textbook precision. Sarah's team entered the building through multiple access points, neutralized the remaining guards, and secured all 12 hostages without any casualties. The entire operation took less than 20 minutes from start to finish. As they evacuated the hostages to the extraction point, Sarah felt a profound sense of satisfaction. This was why she had endured all the challenges and obstacles. This was why she had refused to quit when others tried to force her out. She was making a real difference, saving lives and serving her country in the most meaningful way possible. Back on the naval vessel, as the team conducted their post-mission debrief, Lieutenant Commander Walsh made a point of recognizing Sarah's contribution to the mission's success. "Martinez's actions tonight exemplify everything we look for in a special operations warrior," Walsh told the assembled team. "She identified a threat that could have compromised the entire mission, developed a solution under pressure, and executed it flawlessly. I couldn't be prouder to serve alongside her." The other team members nodded in agreement, and Sarah felt a warmth that had nothing to do with the ship's heating system. These were men who had initially been skeptical about her presence on the team, but who now viewed her as a trusted teammate and friend. Later that evening, as Sarah sat alone on the deck looking out at the stars, she thought about the path that had brought her to this moment. The confrontation with Marcus and his friends had been a crucible that tested not just her physical abilities, but her mental toughness and determination to succeed despite the obstacles. That night in the storage building, she had learned several important lessons that continued to guide her decisions. First, that bullies operated on predictable patterns that could be exploited by someone who understood psychology better than they understood themselves. Second, that real strength came not from size or aggression, but from preparation, intelligence, and the courage to do what was right even when the odds were stacked against you. Most importantly, she had learned that she belonged exactly where she was. No amount of intimidation or discrimination could change the fact that she was capable of performing at the highest levels of military service. The doubters and critics would always be there, but their opinions mattered far less than her own commitment to excellence. As Sarah's career progressed, she became something of a legend within the special operations community. The story of the night, she faced down 3 larger opponents using SEAL tactics spread throughout the military, inspiring other women to pursue careers in combat roles. But Sarah was careful never to let the attention go to her head. She continued to focus on her mission and her teammates, always striving to be the best warrior she could be regardless of what others thought about her gender or size. She mentored younger women entering the military, sharing the lessons she had learned about perseverance and the importance of never giving up on your dreams. Years later, when Sarah was promoted to lieutenant commander and given command of her own special operations team, she made sure to create an environment where everyone was judged solely on their abilities and character rather than their physical appearance or background. During her promotion ceremony, Sarah was asked to give a speech to the assembled crowd of military personnel and their families. As she stood at the podium, she thought about that frightened young woman who had faced down 3 bullies in a storage building years earlier. When I first started this journey, Sarah began, people told me I was too small, too weak, and too different to succeed in special operations. They said I would never fit in with the warriors who defend our nation's security. She paused, looking out at the faces in the crowd. Many of them were young service members just beginning their own careers, including several women who were clearly inspired by her example. What I learned is that being different isn't a weakness. It's a strength. The challenges that seemed insurmountable at the time actually made me stronger, smarter, and more determined to succeed. The people who try to break me down ultimately helped build me up. Sarah's voice grew stronger as she continued. To everyone out there facing similar challenges, remember this. Your size doesn't determine your strength. Your background doesn't determine your future. And other people's limitations don't have to become your own. She concluded with words that had become her personal motto. When they corner you, when they try to break you down, when they tell you that you don't belong, remember that you have everything you need inside yourself to prove them wrong. Use their doubt as fuel. Use their skepticism as motivation. And never, ever give up on becoming the person you were meant to be. The applause was thunderous, but what meant the most to Sarah were the faces of the young women in the audience who looked like they were seeing their own futures reflected in her success. She knew that her journey was far from over, and that there would always be new challenges to overcome and new barriers to break. But she also knew that she had already accomplished something that went far beyond her individual achievements. She had proven that excellence came in all shapes and sizes, and that the most dangerous opponents were often the ones who were underestimated by everyone around them. As Sarah walked off the stage to congratulate the other officers being promoted that day, she smiled at the thought of how surprised Marcus Thompson would be if he could see her now. The woman he had tried to intimidate and drive away had become exactly what she had always known she could be: a warrior, a leader, and an inspiration to others who refused to accept other people's limitations as their own. The storage building incident had ended with 3 bullies on the ground and 1 woman standing tall. But the real victory hadn't been in that moment of physical confrontation. The real victory had been in everything that came after: the refusal to quit, the determination to excel, and the commitment to proving that strength comes in many different forms. Sarah Martinez had been cornered, threatened, and underestimated. But she had used every technique at her disposal, from SEAL tactics to psychological warfare, to emerge victorious. More importantly, she had used that victory as a foundation to build a career that would inspire others for generations to come. In the end, the people who tried to break her had only made her stronger. And that, Sarah reflected, was perhaps the most important lesson of all.